overview first, and then we're going to open up the majority of the time to questions and answers. So with me today, I have three folks who are in different divisions. So we've got enforcement and education, licensing, and finance divisions of the LCB represented here today to help with questions if we need that technical areas of support. So I see you folks are still jumping on. All right, so this past year, obviously, we've had House Bill 1453 pass the legislature providing a tax exemption for medical cannabis patients purchasing some specific product. If you're not familiar with 1453, essentially the three top criteria that have to be met is the cannabis retailers with a medical cannabis endorsement. And so you have to have a medical cannabis endorsement to offer a medical exemption to qualifying patients. So first off, you're going to have to be endorsed as a medical store to be able to provide this. You can only provide this to qualifying patients or the designated providers who are in the state registry. So they can't just come in with a doctor's note, for example. They have to be within the state registry and have a recognition card in order to be able to receive that tax exemption. And it can only be on products identified and labeled as compliant products under the Department of Health rules, which is WAC 2467040, to be eligible for that excise tax. And so one of the things that we want to make sure that we stress in this particular area is this is different than the sales and use tax exemption. So retailers and patients who have engaged in purchases utilizing the sales and use tax exemption have applied that to all product. However, this is very specific to DOH compliant product for patients from medically endorsed stores. So it's really important to recognize that. If you have point of sale systems set up where you're defaulting into just a general tax exemption, you're putting the two together, you could end up having some issues later down the road during audits because retailers are liable for all of the tax that they collect or didn't collect when it was appropriate. And so really being aware of these provisions are going to help you maintain compliance and be able to serve your consumers the most effectively as possible. So when we're looking at the tax exemptions, if you don't have that medically endorsed store, again, I know this is a little bit repetitive, but we get these questions frequently. So you cannot provide that. One of the things that you want to keep in mind as you're looking at medically compliant product, two of the three Department of Health medically compliant product categories actually can be sold to consumers across the board. They're not exclusive to medical patients. However, in order to do the tax exemption, it is exclusive for medical patients in the registry. And so when you can have the high CBD general use products, those two categories can actually be sold to anybody, but you cannot provide the exemption to anybody. That can only be done for the medical patients. The high THC product can only be sold to medical patients in the registry. And so that's slightly different than the others. And so when you're looking at the products, not all of them are treated the same within the system. So there's been a number of questions on how should I what can I do to mitigate risk and be compliant? And when we're looking at acceptance of product, one of the things you may want to do is when you're uploading your inventory and you're entering information into the CCRS, notate that the product is medically compliant in the space provided at that particular point. And so that's going to help you keep track of that. It's going to help with the audits and those types of provisions as well. And listing the product is in the listing the DOH product in those descriptions will also help. If you have that in your point of sale system. But again, making sure you're not having a default into a tax exemption that may not be eligible for that particular person. So you really have to be careful about how your POS system is set up. we also suggest keeping your COAs, a copy of that with a copy of your manifest and your invoice. Keeping everything in one place is going to certainly help you when it comes to audits and be able to identify and verify that those cannabis excise tax exemptions were applied appropriately. So the guidance documents that we provide give a little bit of background on um, uh, the bill that came through and then these provisions. The other things that you're going to want to keep track of as you're making these sales and providing the excise tax exemption to patients. Um, you want to notate the date of sale, of course. The sales price will be important for you to identify for those particular products. If you've got any type of unique identifying authors, or let me back up. If you have a unique SKU or product number for your product, you may want to put that in as well. And so that way you can keep track. And so when you're entering things into your POS system or into your inventory, uploading that in the CCRS, you're identifying it by the product numbers that are in your store. You'll be able to match those types of things up a lot more easily on the back end. And then, of course, you'll want to keep the unique identifying authorization card number of the qualifying patient. So we're not suggesting keeping names and tracking all of that, but have that linkage so it can be validated within a system and when we're working with DOH around those types of provisions. So one of the suggestions to kind of keep up with your product verification and allowances for that excise tax exemption, doing monthly sales tax reports from your POS system can help you mitigate risk in looking at what you've sold, how's it been sold, and making sure that your employees are well aware of how these approaches. Make sure that you're talking with your bookkeepers as well. So the employees need to know how to do this. Of course, the business owners need to know how to do this. But if you're contracting out bookkeeping services and whatnot, making sure that everybody is on the same page and understanding what these provisions are. Again, maintaining those COAs will be important, and that helps the retailer understand was the product tested for heavy metals, basically, or at this particular point. So if you're looking at a COA and something comes across as medically compliant and it doesn't have that heavy metal testing, that's going to be an indicator. This is not medically compliant product and shouldn't be categorized as such. And keep in mind, when we're talking about medically compliant product in Washington, the only labels that get approved are those that are edible labels or for edibles. And the flower packaging isn't approved in Washington. And so you're going to see some packaging coming into the retail store that may not have been pre-approved by the LCB. And so you can't look at the label and just say, oh, okay, it's labeled appropriately. And I say that because the tax liability rests on the retailer, not on the producers and processors. And so, of course, if there's some sort of fraudulent application of packaging and labeling and that's intentional, then of course there could be some other issues that come up with that. But keep in mind, as the retailer, you really want to make sure that you're only providing those tax exemptions, because 37% excise tax is quite a bit if you had to remit that back to the state. If you didn't collect it appropriately. And so when we're looking at the packaging and labeling, we had a lot of interest in folks coming out saying, hey, can we just put the stickers on the packages in the stores? At this point, the answer is no. The privileges of a retailer in state statute don't allow for packaging and labeling, and this would be a labeling process. And so just having a producer send you labels as a retailer, if they're asking you to sticker product, I would highly recommend saying no, because one, you wouldn't be in compliance, and two, you're not going to be able to verify what that product, that if that product had tested for heavy metals, and everything that's in the store wouldn't have had that representative lot testing for that particular purpose. So you want to keep that in mind as it goes. The concern around product getting into market is the label approval process. Folks have expressed concerns that it's not uh, it'll take too long, and so we should have some other allowance in that respect. And so I just wanted to share some data that we've had from licensing. Um, and our licensing division is processing these requests. They are priority requests, and they're processing within 14 days. So the timeline of bringing product to market, if you had it retested, should be fairly minimal. And keep in mind, you have to have the product retested if you're a processor before it can go to market. And so if you're updating your labels based on um, if you're restructuring your label based on the medically compliant product, you're going to be waiting for that product testing from the labs to come back anyways. And so it shouldn't be that long of a timeline just for the packaging and labeling approvals. So we've had 224 label requests come in. And of those, 126 of those have been completed. So that resulted in 111 approved packages and 15 denied. And so we are looking at that, and not every package that is being submitted for approval is uh, being approved. And part of that is it can be the labeling requirements. It can also be because of the medically compliant product standards in Department of Health rules that maybe the serving sizes aren't the appropriate serving size for that particular product. And so you'll have to be looking at those types of things. So it's not an automatic. We still have 98 in the queue, but again, we've been running those in about 14 days for the approval time. The other thing that I wanted to call out is DOH also has, I saw that they published and posted some guidance that you can have access to as well. So feel free to jump over to the Department of Health website, and I'm sure that you'd be able to find the recent publication there. They also have rulemaking open around medically compliant products, so keep an eye on those rules as the discussion unfolds, because that could change how medically compliant product is categorized, and so that could certainly be a change that you want to be aware of if you're conducting medically compliant product sales and then providing the tax exemptions there. So that's kind of a high level overview of what the guidance has specified and pointed out. We'd like to open it up for just general questions for the rest of the session. And so what we're going to do, it looks like we've got quite a few people online. So for I'll give preference to licensees or industry members. So if you've identified yourself by name with affiliation after your name, we'll be prioritizing those who are industry members and licensees to take those questions first, but feel free to raise your hand and then we can unmute you and try to tackle any of the questions that you have. So with that, or you can throw your questions in chat is another option. And so the we'll get started with that. I'm just looking at the chat here, and I was the question was, are there slides to be shared? No, just the two links is referencing the two guidance documents, and those were put in at the beginning of the chat. So if you scroll up to the top of the chat, you'll find those two reference documents there. And we're not presenting additional slides because we don't want to overcomplicate stuff that's already been put out. So I see Cassie. Let's go ahead and bring her online, or him online. Casey or Cassie?
You should be able to unmute now, Casey. We still can't hear you. Can you click on the microphone icon and see if you can get the slash to disappear? That should unmute you. Casey says they are trying. All right, Casey, we'll come back to you. What you might need to do is exit out of the meeting and come right back in. Sometimes that helps, but we'll circle back, okay?
All right, we'll go ahead and move to Brooke Davies.
Hey, Director Nordhorn, thank you so much for putting this together. And I lost service a couple times during your presentation, but I think that I got the gist of it. So I just wanted to kind of follow up on the one question related to the label submissions for edibles that are already have gone through the approval process. Because again, that's the only product type that needs approval before it goes to market. So concentrates, flour, all those sorts of things do not, just the edibles. And I know that folks may be like updating their products. Like you mentioned, the serving sizes and things like that are reasons why a label may not be approved. So if someone intends to make a high CBD product that previously wasn't, or a high THC product that previously wasn't, makes perfect sense that it would need to go through that full kind of product approval process. But for those folks that are not changing their recipe at all, and they're just taking that extra step of getting that distillate oil that's going to be used in lots of products to get heavy metal testing, and they'd like to just add, just the FDA language and then the sticker. Is there any way, and you and I have talked about this before, but that there could be like a bifurcation, at least some way to expedite just those approvals? It sounds like they're moving through pretty quickly, but even 14 days, or if there's if more come through, like some sort of way to make that process more streamlined. We've heard anecdotally from some of our members that they have been able to do kind of like a pre-approval where they just send them all in one action and kind of say, here it is, and before they've even done it, and that's been helpful. So I don't know if there's a way to kind of build off of that, or submit some sort of like affidavit, like just some way to expedite for those products that literally aren't changing the amount of THC or anything. They're just taking that one extra step of having the oil tested, or they may have already done that, and they just want to add that. So just wondering if that's possible or something that we could work on together.
So thanks for the question, Brooke. Our licensing division is working on some ideas on how to streamline that. And I don't want to commit them to anything, but in sharing some of the information, one of the ideas that came up was having for example, having a direct email address on DOH submissions. So it can kind of be queued up and those can get to first. So we're working on some of those types of ideas at this point, and hopefully you'll be able to see something along those lines. But again, the 14 days is actually, when we look at the 14 days, these are getting reviewed within the 14 days. Some of them are going faster than that. And so again, with the product testing that needs to be done for the product, because they weren't tested before as medically compliant product, I don't think that 14 days is really going to be as impactful as the testing timeline that you'll have for getting that product retested.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. I understand it. Just what we've seen over the last several years, even before this DOH thing came about, is that the product approval timeline tends to fluctuate. So like there's times where they're 14 days for months or a year, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, it's taking 3 or 4 months. So just with that in consideration, I still think it would be worth exploring if there is like an expedited way just for these certain products that they're not like changing anything. So just a thought, and appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Yeah. And like I said, our licensing team is working on that. So it's not that we're opposed to that. We're actually trying to figure out ways to help support the industry in this. So I appreciate that. I see Casey is on again. Let's try Casey.
Casey, I can tell that you've unmuted, but we still can't hear you. Still not hearing anything, Casey. If you want to try logging out of the meeting and logging back in, I feel like that's our best bet to try next. Thank you.
All right, so we have a question in chat asking if you're a medically endorsed retailer and carry products that meet DOH requirements, is it mandatory to give qualifying patients the cannabis tax exemption? I'm going to ask Renee to come off of mute just so I don't get some of the details wrong, but I believe so. But Renee, could you tackle that one?
I will give it my best shot. How's that? I'm not sure because they're qualifying for it. I don't know that you're mandatory to do it, but you could get a complaint from a consumer if they should have gotten it and you didn't get it or you didn't provide it. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Justin?
Well, I know when we were talking about this issue a little bit before, and that's why I kind of wanted to put you on the spot. Sorry about that. But we were talking about so let me back up. So if you know that they're a qualifying patient and they have a card registered and they're going through that in the sales, then yes, you're going to have to give them that excise tax exemption. If you're supposed to be giving somebody an excise tax exemption and you don't, and that's identified, I believe, and this is where I think, Renee, you and I were talking about this, that the retailer would be obligated to provide the tax exemption even after the fact if they had qualified at the time. So it's not like they're going to come back in and then show you all the credentials, but if they were supposed to get it at the time of the sale, and you denied that, then there could be some issues with owing that tax piece back to the
To the consumer.
patient. Is that right?
That's correct.
So, and that's kind of where that nuance comes in. So thanks. That I wanted to make sure I remembered that right. So, if at the time of the sale everything's been presented and you refuse that, then you could be liable for paying back that excise tax that you collected inappropriately from the patient. Okay. So are there any products excluded from being qualified for DOH compliance? Yes, there are. And so if you go into the Department of Health rules and regulations, and I can put this one in. So under the Department of Health regulations, um, there are some products that have different serving sizes. So if you have a particular product that is falling under one of these categories and your serving sizes aren't accurate with that compared to some of the general products in the 502 market, then those products potentially may not qualify. And I think that one of the things that I think there's some confusion about out in the retail space at times, and I don't know how widespread this is. It's just something I've heard as of late. But there's a number of questions around the high THC products and how those kind of fit into the category and fall into place. And I want to remind folks that open this particular rule up because the high THC compliant products are really limited. They're limited to capsules and tablets, tinctures, transdermal patches, and suppositories. And so you're not going to be able to have other cannabis products that are outside of that limited list for high THC products that would end up being a qualified product. And so something to consider if you're a processor and trying to figure out how you're going to formulate some of your medically compliant product, particularly for the high THC category. So I have a question. They want to confirm DOH medical products will still be subject to the same pesticide tolerance limits listed in 314.55.108. Nothing has changed in our pesticide tolerance limits around this. The only thing that has changed is the opportunity for the retailers to provide a 37% excise tax exemption on the sale to the patient under those three criteria: that they're a registered patient in the registry, that it is a identified Department of Health compliant product, and that it's being sold from a medically endorsed store. So that's the only thing that changed. So none of the testing from the pesticide standpoint in the regulations are changing for this particular bill. Other questions? All right, I see Casey hand come up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are.
Perfect. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what was going on. I had a question. So I know that a medical consultant needs to look up on the SAW account if a customer has an active account and can be considered a medical customer. We do have a question: is can a bud tender, if that function is done with a medical consultant, can we have a bud tender bring out that transaction? Or does that transaction fully need to be helped by a certified medical consultant?
Um, so I'll try to answer this, but if somebody from, I see that we have a few folks on from Department of Health, if they want to raise their hand and chime in, just for, verification, that would be great. Um, so one of the things with medical consultants, they are the ones who have to enter people into the system. But I do not believe that it's a requirement that they have to conduct a sales transaction. Um, but you certainly need to make sure that those products are Department of Health compliant. And here is our esteemed colleague from DOH, Shannon. Please jump in.
I just wanted to affirm that you are correct, Justin. So a consultant is one that has to issue the cards, renew, and has that role. But a bud tender, a regular employee, can go into the system and verify a card. That's what they're allowed to do, and they would register through the system to do so as just a regular employee.
Gotcha. So does that mean that they would need a SAW account as well, just like the medical consultant does, in order to see that verified?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shannon. Appreciate that. Other questions that, so I see, so all products that are concentrated or concentrates, cartridges, etc., would fall under the general use category. Again, take a look at the Department of Health rules for the general use provisions, but those, if they are meeting this, the appropriate standards, then I believe those would fall under that general use area. But again, it has to be medically compliant. It has to be packaged and labeled as such. So it's not just something that's on the shelf available for everybody. Other questions? So I'll pause for just a moment just to see if any of our LCB folks from the other divisions, if I'm missing something that's important to call out, go ahead and jump on into this dialogue. Cool. I don't see anybody, Brian, Susan, or Renee jumping back in. So we got another question in the chat. It looks like to check understanding, what is the process of checking, verifying that a producer processor is using approved packaging? Is that something retailers should be concerned about? If you have the edible products, that's what we approve. If it's flour, for example, that's not something that we approve. They would still need to have the appropriate packaging, so it would need to be in compliance. And within the handouts, I believe we had articulated in there that the required statements have to be on there for different packaging and the like. So when you're looking at bringing something into inventory, and if it has, if it's being indicated on the manifest and in the inventory that you're purchasing that's DOH compliant, I would take a look at the package, and then I would also cross-reference the COA just to make sure that you're seeing that heavy metal testing being conducted. And I think if you're doing those types of things, then you can be pretty confident in the fact that, it's DOH product. Again, if there's something that the producer or processor is doing on the other end that's intentionally mislabeling, then of course that would be a different issue. But you'll want to be taking a look at that. So again, liability is on the retailer, and that's why it's so important to have this understanding. When we've talked about some of the label approvals, for example, we want to be very cautious around some of just opening it up for that type of approval, because there's so much at stake for the retailers. 37% is quite a bit if you're not doing this appropriately. So we want to build as much confidence for the retailers as possible. when they're making these sales. And so again, looking at the COAs and the packaging and labeling to make sure that you have DOH compliant product, and then only selling that from that endorsed store to patients that are in the registry. And I don't know if we've seen an uptick. I haven't talked to our counterparts at DOH recently on data, if we've seen an uptick in the number of registered patients. But during this past year, we were down to about 9,000, I think was the number. And so there wasn't that many patients in the registry. So, you'll have to be looking at all of those different types of dynamics. So if you're seeing a whole bunch of people coming in, for this, and you have all this product coming in, remember, it's got to be tested. You got to be in the registry. You have to have a card, those types of things. And so you want to make sure that your staff understands all of that, so there's no misapplication of that exemption. Other questions? So we won't go the entire time if there's no questions. So I'll wait just another minute or two and see if we have something else come up in chat. Make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. Douglas, go ahead.
Hey, everyone. Thanks again. So wanted to, once again, kind of revisit what Brooke had said. A product like the one that we make, which is a beverage product, very low dose, if we get the cannabis input specifically tested for the heavy metals, add that to our existing ingredient, do we need to do the full heavy metals panel on every batch of newly produced product that uses that input? Or are we able to still be DOH compliant with just that test?
So for all new batches that come through, you have to have that tested. You don't get, there's not just one test and then everything subsequently gets deemed acceptable. So any type of new batch that you have, you'll have to make sure that the heavy metal testing has passed.
All right. While I am not a fan, thank you for the clarification. And that will be cost prohibitive. So, all right.
Other questions? All right, other questions going once? Twice? All right, hearing none. Thank you all for joining us today. And if you do have follow-up questions that you think of afterwards, you can certainly send something to us at rules@lcb.wa.gov. I'm sure our counterparts at Department of Health would also be happy to answer your Department of Health related questions that you have. So thanks everybody for joining us. Appreciate our colleagues from Department of Health and our LCB team jumping on. I hope you all have a great week. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin.